here.
Yeah. For sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Francesca. Welcome to Critical Babe Theory. And this week we have Andrew Ridker, just author.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to be a professor if schools were hiring.
Okay, great.
But I'll take it as a compliment. I'm for now, just
author. I think that's exciting. Author of your first book was called The Altruists. Mm-hmm. The second one was called Hope. It's called Hope. You have a new one forthcoming.
Yeah, next year, called Power and Light, tentatively.
And these books have appeared on the New Yorker's favorite book list, the New York Times. You are beloved. You're like, I would not go that far.
Yeah, no, I don't know.
You've been blessed with critical blessings.
People who have read it, most have seemed to like them to somewhat. Yeah. I don't know.
That's a great.
As long as people read them, whatever they think, I'm happy to be read by anyone.
Yeah. It's a privilege.
Absolutely.
It's a gift and a privilege.
Yeah.
And the reason that we started talking was because Andrew wrote this article in New York Mag called A New Jewish Plotline. This was 6 months ago?
Yeah, maybe 6 months ago, yeah.
Which, can you just kind of outline for us what that article is about?
Yeah, the article was basically the idea comes out of this Peter Beinart book called Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza. Mm-hmm. And he basically says something to the effect of, for a long time, Jews have had this story that we tell about ourselves in which we're this vulnerable, powerless, morally infallible group that is constantly facing existential destruction. And out of that have come some dangerous and destructive policies and ideas. And the way that he framed it is like, this is a story we tell about ourselves, got me thinking as like a Jewish American novelist, like, what are the stories we tell ourselves? So I kind of went back into the 100 years of Jewish American literature and was like, I'm not a Torah scholar or a Talmud scholar, but I know Jewish American lit. What have novels and short stories been saying about the relationship between Jews and privilege and power for the last 100 years? And we can get into it more, but I basically broke it up into these 3 stages, and the kind of net result was like, the way that Jews in America have been writing about their relationship to power is much more complicated and nuanced than some of the stories we might tell ourselves about our like identities. Like, the authors have been exploring this stuff on way deeper levels than our sort of maybe public, the way we talk about ourselves in public. And I've just always been interested in that. I feel like, for me at least, growing up, and I'll caveat it with, Jewish, but like white and upper middle class and Ashkenazi and all the subgroups, but being Jewish always felt like a paradox of privilege and persecution. And I think a lot of us are okay to acknowledge the persecution side because it fits into a whole history of persecution. But unless you acknowledge the privilege side of that equation, you start giving room for Israel to do terrible stuff, or for your group to do things you might not like, because you're like, well, we're the persecuted group, we have to defend ourselves. It's like, the balance is really important, and I feel like something that can be hard to acknowledge because it's like holding 2 things in your head at once.
Of course, there's a line from your book Hope that I really loved, which is, okay, so without doing a whole, basically, like, it centers around a family, and the son, Gideon, has a friend in college who talks about a trip that he took to Israel. And he says, like, this is his friend, Gideon's friend, saying, as soon as the plane touched down, all the anxiety I've lived with my whole life just evaporated. In Israel, you know where you stand. You know who's good and you know who's bad. You know that what's right and what's wrong. It's like they found the cure for ambiguity. And I thought that was an amazing line. I mean,
it's a not very exaggerated or not at all exaggerated version of something you hear, where I think when you grow up sort of Jewish in America, you're either a teeny minority living in wherever you live, or you live in like Boston or New York or Chicago or DC, and you live in a very Jewish area. But either way, you're like, I have this sense that, I have to grapple with the ambiguity, this power privilege paradox. But if I go to Israel, everything feels very cut and dry.
Yeah.
Which always made me laugh because it's the least cut and dry place. I mean, everything is deeply complicated and crazy over there, but there's a way in which I think there's a perception that American Jews have that if you go there, like, oh, finally I belong, and I know like what's good and what's bad and what's right and what's wrong.
Right.
When in fact it's, to me, the complete opposite case. And the ambiguity and the paradox is what I love about being Jewish. If there's anything I hold on to about that part of my identity, it's the grappling with the two sides and not knowing exactly where you fit and having to work through it. The idea of going to a place where you're like, I automatically fit in, I automatically have rights that not everyone has, I know where I stand, is like antithetical to my experience of being Jewish personally.
Also to sort of the Jewish intellectual tradition.
Yes.
Which comes out of like studying the Talmud.
Totally.
And like this whole, like this kind of deep, pressing, constant investigation as opposed to what this is like so loose, but this kind of more Christian mindset to me of like, we found it and it's settled.
Totally.
You know?
Yes. It's that intellectual tradition that I'm not a religious person. That intellectual tradition is what keeps me tethered to that part of myself. To stop questioning, it would be like, to be Jewish and not question in that way is like, I don't understand. That's so to have that character who, I should be clear, he's like a college kid going on basically a birthright tour, and that's a lot of the view they kind of feed you on those trips is like, don't ask too many questions. You start asking questions about, well, how come on the map that you've given us, like Palestine isn't here? Like where does, and they're just kind of like, stop asking questions. And to me, I'm like, stop asking questions. The whole point is asking. It's, if we have a fault, it's we're asking too many. Like everyone I grew up with, my parents, my family, my friends, my synagogue, whatever, we annoy the hell out of each other because everyone just asks questions. There's never an answer, but that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
And to be like, you're going on a trip to Israel, but don't ask about that.
Yeah.
I'm like, it makes no sense to me.
So you went on Birthright.
I went on a sort of like temple trip to Israel that followed the Birthright itinerary pretty closely, and then a million people I knew, my sister, my best friend, whatever, all went. And one of my best friends in college came back, and for like 2 weeks he was just like spouting these talking points that seemed totally at odds with what I knew his political beliefs to be. And he'd be like, well, you know, they got to defend themselves, and you know, if you break a couple eggs, and I'd be like, this is not you, what's happening? And after 2 weeks he like snapped out of it, and he was like, sorry, I was just like, that's all I was hearing for like the entire trip, and it just like came home with me a little bit. And
the beaches are really nice, and the women are really beautiful. Like, I mean, it's like, I get it.
And they make the trips, I mean, it's like a long running joke, but the trips they're like a little breeding program. Like you're supposed to hook up. Because the idea is, if you meet you're a Jewish boy, you meet a Jewish girl on the trip, you get married, you have Jewish babies, you're not
thank God.
doing no intermarriage, and you met in Israel, so you're always going to have this big emotional tie to Israel. And even if you don't meet your spouse there, you're going to be like, Israel, what do I think when I think Israel? That was the place I got laid a bunch. Like, you will have, it's a wide open secret. Like, that's what it is. And they have hot soldiers on the trips of both genders. Like,
interesting.
Everyone hooks up.
They specifically recruit the most conventionally attractive soldiers. Okay, it's just anecdotally.
This is my conspiratorial thinking.
Got it.
But they seem to be hot very often.
Okay.
But this, I borrowed something from real life in the book where they go on the trip, and I think in the book it's like everybody gets an M&M, and it's like one of those traffic light parties where it's like you wear green, that means you're open to hook up. You wear yellow, that means maybe. Red is like I'm taken.
Yeah.
In the book they hand out colored M&Ms to all the kids, so you know who's fair game to hook up with on the trip. That detail came from a real, like a blog that someone kept of their birthright trip, which I believe some prominent like journalists were on. Like it was like it might have been like Barry Weiss before she was Barry Weiss.
No,
there was this like group of like journalists who went on a trip together, and they kept a blog about it. And I was like, great, more research that I can use for the book. And they did this M&M thing where it's like you're color coded per how sexually available you are. Again, it's like making these associations in your head, and it's genius. It's like evil genius. It's like, send them to this place, don't really talk about the politics so much. Here's what they do. They send you to the Holocaust Museum, and then they send you to sites about the founding of Israel. And this happened on my trip too. They create a link in your mind between there was the Holocaust and then there was Israel, and one had to follow the other. It was like inevitable.
They're inextricably linked
deeply.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And in the midst of all that, it's beaches, it's hot soldiers, it's Dead Sea mud. You're in your bikini, but you're covered in Dead Sea mud. It's like, it's crazy. And of course, everyone has a great time.
Yeah.
Like, it's a free trip.
Yeah.
And you get to hook up and you see some stuff. Like, but then as soon as someone goes, what about what we're not talking about on this? They shut it down.
Right.
Because Sheldon Adelson funds it, and like...
Who's that?
He's like a big pro-Israel, super far-right, Trumpy. He owns like a bunch of casinos in Vegas. Like, just very like transparently has an agenda. And it's get young people really into Israel to keep that going.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do want to also say that I don't know when this is going to come out. And I'm not necessarily always the most timely, but the last few weeks America has gone to war with Israel against Iran, and so a lot of these ideas are not theoretical. Like, Israel is doing stuff now, and I guess what I was interested in what you just said is like this idea of how do stories that we tell ourselves culturally like then affect policy, right? And I feel like, and that happens in America too, right? On their stories, J.D. Vance with his Heritage Americans, and like there's a whole story that he has in his mind. Or even, why was I reading about the Lost Cause, the like Southern Lost Cause stories? Like, those stories then result. Which is sort of, I guess, as a writer in the world would be encouraging, right? That like when that like stories
I guess.
And thoughts that we have can then like in some way bleed out and color the world that we're in. But what I think is so interesting in the article that you wrote, and that gets more into in Peter Beinart's book, is like the really uneasy tension of like, yes, so the story that we're really comfortable with is like the downtrodden, the persecuted, the pogroms, like all which is totally
it's a
real.
Massive part of the story. It's just not the entire
the whole
story.
And how ambiguous it is to then also simultaneously hold that like with the amount of power that is also held. I mean, specifically in Israel, but then also something you talk about in your article is about how if you look at like wealth averages, I think in the United States of American Jewish people, like their average.
It's like, this is where it gets so tricky, because you mention anything having to do with like power, privilege, wealth, and you put the word Jew anywhere near that.
Yeah.
And everybody's hackles are raised, mine included, because they're so commonly used in these stereotypical or conspiratorial ways. But I figured in writing the article, someone has to address the fact that we're not the powerless minority that we were for much of history. We're still a minority, but we're not as powerless as we once were. And if a Jewish person isn't coming out and saying this is part of the equation too, then we cede the ground to the Nick Fuenteses and the conspiracies people to be like, they'll claim to be downtrodden and persecuted, but they're not. But the fact is, like, Jews have had this incredible success in America that is a testament to many things. Some of it is like good old-fashioned bootstraps, hard work, and intellect. Some of it is having the privilege of white skin when other groups don't always have that. But regardless, like, Jews have been really successful, and I think growing up for me, there was always this weird disconnect between all I hear about at Hebrew school and Sunday school every week is like the persecution. And I'm like, my life's pretty nice. Everyone who's teaching me these lessons, life is pretty nice. No one's like, and then when like a really minor incident of anti-Semitism arises, it's like red alert. Right. And then I'd see other groups go through much worse stuff and be like, I think it's good that we're on red alert for this, but like, I don't understand why we're treating ourselves in one way and looking at other groups another way. It just didn't track for me. So in the article, I'm basically like, Jews have been really successful in America. We have a lot of economic and political influence in America. Israel is a really powerful country. Those facts have to enter the persecution and complicate the persecution narrative, which is not to say override the persecution narrative, but it's like when you say that you're persecuted for so long and don't account for that other stuff, you give yourself moral license to kind of do anything in the name of protecting yourself. And I think we see that with Israel.
Right. I mean, this just makes me think, I guess the first most like 101 thing it makes me think about is how the conflation today between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, which is like, my understanding, and I could be wrong, is that in some ways the state of Israel has wanted to conflate those for propaganda reasons and for its like own survival, because obviously being afraid of anti-Semitism is a much more potent thing than anti-Zionism, right? Because like anti-Zionism would be equivalent to like a political
right.
So if somebody's like walks into a room and they're like, I'm against communism,
right,
you know what I mean? That's not,
it's not like you're attacking an identity in the same way.
Exactly.
The thing that drives me crazy about this is it seems to me that there are basically like two groups that are primarily responsible for the conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And one is anti-Semites who are like, yeah, let's criticize Israel as cover for criticizing Jews.
Right.
And the other is like establishment Jews and Israel. And so it's like coming from both sides. And so when people, to me, I'm not a Zionist, but I am a Jew, and it doesn't seem very complicated for me to be like, yeah, you can be this thing and be against that thing, and it's not like I'm against myself or something. But when someone criticizes Israel and then a bunch of Jews or Israelis say that's anti-Semitic,
and you're self-hating.
You're
a self-hating Jew. That's like always thrown around.
Then that's just opening the door for actual anti-Semites to it's like it basically it quashes dissent from the Jewish left by saying like any criticism of this is wrong. And I mean, I have to tell you, when that article came out, I think the first internet comment or whatever on the New York Mag site came within like 3 minutes of it being live, and it was someone calling me Hitler.
Really?
And from then on, I was like, I can't look at these. But people would text me all day being like, these comments are nuts. And I was like, don't tell me, I'm not looking.
T.O., I just want to say, I have recently got into social media fights with, this is the groups, and it happened in 3 successive weeks. So clearly, like, I'm the common denominator. The problem lies within me. I got in fights with America Firsters, then the Tankies. Do you know about them?
Yeah.
And then I got in the fight with the childless cat ladies. Anyway, I made a comment on something about like anti-child propaganda. And these all spun out into based on one innocent comment I felt that I have made. And I'll tell you, the texture and the tone of all of the fights was identical.
Yeah.
And the constituencies of those groups are so different that I realized the medium is the message. So like the comment board, like you being Hitler, to me, what I learned is I was like, oh, this is just how the internet works.
Yeah. I'm like, Hitler famous for his 3,500 word deep dives into Jewish literature and like really his like love of Philip Roth. Yeah, I feel like I knew there would be some controversy. Some people see the word Israel or Gaza or genocide or what have you in an article title, and they're like, I'm out. Like, I know what I think already. I'm not going to read this or engage with it. And I don't mind, whatever. If someone's like, I read this in bad faith or I didn't read it at all, like, okay. But I was not prepared for like the level of vitriol that came out of literally just being like, I'm Jewish. I like being Jewish. It's great. And I also think Israel's done some bad stuff that our Jewish writers would like have had some things to say about.
Yeah.
That was enough to just, I'm Hitler, it's like whatever else.
And where do you feel that those comments were coming from? Were those coming from Jewish readers or non-Jewish readers?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, I don't know, probably both. I mean, I developed a little litmus test for myself where if a comment did sneak by me like trying to hide my eyes and ears from them, and I got a crazy email, someone looked at my website, or I got a text from someone, if I would Google their name and then Zoran, and it was like 9 times out of 10, it was like someone was having a hysterical meltdown over how Zoran would be like the end of Jews in New York.
Right.
And I was like, okay, so I can dismiss this person's I just do a quick check. So like some journalist would be like, someone started a Substack account in reaction to this piece. Like they wrote their first post about this. And I was like, who is this guy? And I Googled him and I Googled Zoran, and it's like 10 Yahoo News articles being like Zoran is going to do the Holocaust in New York. And I was like, okay, so I don't,
it doesn't
that's
matter.
licensed to not listen to anything you have to say.
Totally.
But it was, I think it's both. And I also can say my family, who are like range from like the center left to the farther left, beyond my parents, who are great, like silence. Like
really?
From people who normally reach out in the case of publications and things, just like you could hear a pin drop, and it was like, I know, it was just one of those like, I know you saw it. And again, I didn't think it was that.
It's really, I mean, to be honest, it is not a controversial article.
I felt very like I'm getting the worst of both, where I'm like, I didn't say anything that bold and like new and different, but I'm getting the hate as if I did. I'm like, I guess it's weird. I'm like, in my sad defense, I'm like, it was a pretty mild. I'm like, I'm not trying to stir up, I don't know.
But this is like, that's the thing about this supercharged, you know, I still have people reaching out to me after my play, which you saw, which is about 2 Columbia professors who were married after October 7th, and they're on opposing sides of the campus protest movements. I still have people reaching out to me who are like incredibly angry. Yeah. You know, it's charged. It's super charged, and a therapist once described it to me as like, you kind of have like 2 traumatized populations and like traumatizing each other. But like the idea being, there's a part of me, there's like the logical, rational part of me that's like wants to just grab my relatives and friends and people I went to temple with and be like, how can you not see that the moral education that you gave me only leads one place, which is this, what's happening here is wrong. How can you like do these mental acrobatics to be like, well, it's okay to kill a bunch of girls in Iran or whatever at that, that school, in some weird sort of preemptive self-defense logical, like, how can you think that and also think all the things you taught me about like goodness and kindness and tolerance and care for the other and the immigrant, etc. But then there's like I understand the lizard brain thing of like my, so and so in my family was wiped out in the Holocaust, and I grew up with anti-Semitism, and anytime anything ever enters my field of vision that is even remotely, even if it's just anti-Zionist, like every survival mechanism goes into effect. Like I don't agree with it, but I understand it. Yeah. But I think that's what's at play here too. I should also say, I had a friend who, he grew up going to like a Jewish day school, and they would announce over the PA system every single time a Jew or an Israeli was killed in the Middle East. Whoa. And obviously they did not do that every time a Palestinian or an Arab was killed. And he, like, if you grow up like that, you're going to just be on super high alert all the time, but you're just not, again, it's like you're getting this sliver of the story, but not the whole thing. And because I remember being like, wow, that's crazy. You're like a little kid. Like, they're like, we're interrupting 3rd grade math to announce like this soldier has just been killed. If that happens to you every week for your entire childhood, you're going to build up a story in your head. Yeah. I think the thing that, to go back to what you were saying about like these stories, the ones that gain the traction in the culture are like the least nuanced, most kind of nationalistic versions. And it's like, maybe this is the difference between like stories and literature, but like stories are good for getting people motivated to a cause because they're simplistic, and like literature is about shading in all the gray. And I think for me the essay was sort of like, let's go to the literature and see how that complicates the story. And do you feel like people are, well, I don't want to put you on the spot, are there more books coming out now that feel like they kind of grapple with this ambiguity, specifically around October 7th, or is it just still too soon?
there's been some really good nonfiction work that's it kind of for me started with noticing the Beinart and being like, interesting, this is a book that's like,
here I have it here. It's called the Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza.
And it's like, it's short, it's super accessible, and it's written to an audience of Jews that might not want to hear what he has to say. So it's like gentle, it's approachable, there's like nothing crazy radical in it. He's just like talking you through. And I was like, okay, this book's kind of on my like, this is on the like NPR lib radar. Like that's kind of tells you something that people are more willing to talk about this in those circles. And then as I was doing research, British writer named Rachel Cockerell has a great book called Melting Point, which is kind of in part a history of Zionism in which you see how arbitrary a lot of the decisions were. And it's like, Israel could have been in Uganda, it could have been in Madagascar. Like there's all the things we view as inevitable.
You mean like politically it could have been, they were in talks to potentially. Okay.
Yeah, and the way that so many Jews at the time were against it, and like just the way we talk about Israel now is like, it was always Israel, and it was always our homeland, and it was always everyone supported it, and da-da. It's like when they were coming up with it, most people were like, this is a stupid idea. A lot of them were like, this is an interesting idea, but what if it was here or there or somewhere else? It totally just makes you rethink the place we're at now.
I guess just to play the devil's advocate, as a Christian and Easter is coming up, I'm just thinking like, but that's the land, man. Do you know what I mean? Like that is, if there is a land potent with story, at least for like the West. Like that is the land. And I remember reading, I don't know where when I was a kid, reading about how like for all the charge around that territory, it's actually so mild in terms of its environment. It's these like gentle rolling hills. Like there's nothing, it's not like the Colorado Rockies out there. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't like have the dramatic
it's kind of boring. When I went as a kid, I was like, this is what they're fighting over? It's just like,
really?
Everything's sand and flat. I was so like
nonplussed.
I was like, take me back to New York.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've never been. So maybe I have a different. So maybe it's like an idealization.
I think the stories are potent for like all the Abrahamic religions, and so while it's like it makes a kind of sense more so than Uganda or Madagascar, which were real places they considered. But the fact that they were considering so many places and the fact that so many people were against it at the start, it just like shakes up your notion of historical inevitability.
Were they against it because they thought it was a poor idea? Like that it would like, it's an idea that would create a lot of conflict because it would mean like displacing other people? Like what would...
Well, that's interesting too. There were some people who felt that way, although a lot of it was like, what the hell are we going to do over there? Like, that's not where we live. We've been a diasporic people forever. Like, what do you mean we're going back there? Like, what are you talking about? We live here. And it was only when the pogroms got really, really bad that people started taking that idea more seriously. Because they're like, I don't know if we can stay. But most Jews in Europe were like, for better or worse, and despite whatever limited rights we might have, like, we live here, we're European, or American or whatever, we're not Middle Easterners. And now of course it's extra complicated because something like 30% of Jewish Israelis are Mizrahi and they're not European. But point being, there's a lot of people, there's a Benjamin Moser book called Anti-Zionism coming out that's like a history of Zionism through the lens of people that were not for it. There's a lot of interesting stuff. Mark Tracy, who's at the Times, who I brought to your play, is working on a book about like diasporic Judaism. So a lot of nonfiction writers and journalists are working on this. I think it's early to see fiction, although when I was writing the piece, my editor was like, can you poke around and see what's coming down the pipeline? And again, it's still too early, but like Josh Cohen, who I write about in the piece, has a short story in the New Yorker, that's like a sort of post-October 7th story. I heard from a bunch of people after the article came out. Leah Abrams is a young writer who's got a novel that's like kind of touching on this stuff coming out. It's coming. It's just fiction is slow as it should be, and it's like it takes time to digest the news, and then you have to think about it for a couple years, and then it takes 2 years for the book to come out. It's just it's like by then, who knows? I think about this as a fiction writer a lot. It's impossible to catch the zeitgeist on purpose. Like,
see, that's where I feel like theater is kind of amazing because you can turn things around.
You can,
faster.
yeah.
But anyway, that's a separate subject. Yeah, I guess I was thinking something that you were talking about before, like the lizard brain. You know, there's this idea I think about a lot. It's actually a line from a different play of mine, but one of my characters like talks about how like everybody will betray you in the end.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? It's just like, which is like some people's worldview, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, and in the light of that, like maybe I'm sympathetic to these tribal affinities,
Yeah.
right? Like I get, as somebody who doesn't have a lot of family, like one feels without a tribe, one feels vulnerable.
Yeah.
And like the tribe is strongest when everyone's down to like when there is kind of groupthink, you know? And so part of me is, and I hope this came through in my play, is like very sympathetic to these like deep emotional needs, specifically in the play, like in the main Jewish character, to get rid of ambiguity. Like I understand that.
Of course. It's much easier to like if you could just kind of sign on and be like, whatever my group says, let's just go with that. I don't want to like worry too much about it. That's like a much easier and more comfortable way to live. I just don't think I think it like the capacity for that to like, that's where fascism comes out of. It's just like, just whatever everyone's saying. But like, but I think it's just to say, that's not to underestimate the genuine human comfort there. Like I think the reason people flock to these movements is because it gets you out of ambiguity, which is an uncomfortable place to be. I just was raised in a way, I feel like, that the ambiguity and the struggle is kind of the point. And you know, they have there's like two lines about this. One is, you know, they say 2 Jews, 3 opinions, right? I'm like, and then the other joke is like, there's a Jew on a desert island and he builds 2 synagogues, one that he goes to and one he wouldn't set foot in. You know, it's like, that's how I understand this my particular tribe.
Right.
It's like, we're supposed to disagree with each other. We're supposed to have it out. It's not supposed to be like a top down, like the way that I was surprised when I got more exposure to Catholicism, how top down it is, because like there's no Jewish pope, you know, there's no organized thing.
I mean, in my neighborhood, there's a poster of the Messiah everywhere.
Yeah, mine too. Yeah,
but I think different. That's a fringe. That's a fringe group. We don't need to get into it.
But just to say, like, yeah, I feel like, I don't know. I understand what you're saying. It would be nice to get to switch that off sometimes.
Yeah.
But I also think we have to be like vigilant.
Totally.
Have our brains on, and you know.
I've had this big question in my mind since October 7th, which is like, I have not yet been able to predetermine the personality type that either breaks pro-Israel or breaks anti-Zionist.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking, I don't care about non-Jews. I'm going to take them out of the equation because I don't care about them. But I've had this really interesting experience. Actually, that's not true. There's also been really surprising. I have never been able to ascertain beforehand which way someone's going to go. And I've had friends who are like, even parts of very marginalized groups who then break like pro-Israel. Right. And I the question that I'm going to now put to you is, what is the secret little thing in somebody that makes them go either way? Because I really have been so surprised since October 7th to see that like people have broken in completely.
It definitely does not go in a conventional left-wing, right-wing.
Yeah.
It doesn't break down that way. And now it's extra confusing because, again, it's like the left is anti-Israel, and then the right was able to step in and be like, we'll be the protectors of the Jews, we'll be the pro-Israel group. But then
they're really anti-Semitic.
They're really anti-Semitic, and that's coming out now with like the extreme, like Nick Fuentes-Groyper stuff is like, the mask is kind of off there.
But not even that extreme. Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens.
Yes.
I mean, they're pretty mainstream now.
Yes. And it's very like, but this is kind of goes back to the birthright thing. And this is my like uninformed, but kind of like novelist take, is that I think it's coming from a place of emotion and not like reason. And that's not to discount emotion, but just to say that the reason they make birthright so appealing is because they want you to form an emotional bond with a place where you had a coming of age experience. And then no matter what happens politically, your rational brain is like being overridden by your fond memories of being there.
Right.
Like, everyone was so nice to me there.
Right. How could it be bad?
How could it be bad? So I feel like this isn't a rule for everyone, but I think what makes you break is not about where do your views fall in a kind of rational, like, well, I support this economic agenda, and thus Israel slots here or there. It's more like what feelings come up around it, and that's going to be determined by a lot of other things. But that's the sort of, like, if I was writing these characters as a novelist, it would not be somebody sat down in a blank white-walled room and wrote down all their political views and figured out where they stand on. It would be like a gut level, like, my grandma was in the Holocaust and therefore Israel at all costs, or my grandma was in the Holocaust and therefore never again to anyone. And so I don't support what Israel's like. But I think it's going to break in an emotional way.
It's irrational. That's what I've noticed with people, and I've been like really amazed. But you know what I sort of do think, I'm like, well, because there's been this conflation of anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism, and then the adoption of like the protectors of the Jews being on the right. But we all know that was just to like get more control in leftist institutions, you know, like i.e. colleges and stuff. Now I sort of do feel worried that like it is more dangerous to be Jewish in America than it has been in a long time. Now, I'm not asking you to weigh in on that or not, but like, to me, the fact that somebody as politically powerful and mainstream as Tucker Carlson, having Nick Fuentes on, who's like so out and out anti-Semitic, like, to me it does. But I guess what's so complicated about this is, like, in some ways I feel like Israel created this problem by conflating anti-Semitism and Zionism and setting up an easier ground to. It's just terrifying to me. I
completely agree. I mean, to me it's very complicated, and then at the same time it's not complicated. By which I mean, I think it just requires people to hold two ideas in their head at once, which is like, Jews can be a small minority that are under threat from these really politically powerful right-wing figures that are out and out crazy anti-Semitic Holocaust deniers. I read a thing the other day that was like 50-something% of like Republicans under the age of 40 or 50 self-identify as anti-Semitic.
Oh, wow.
Or racist, or racist. Like, it's not like older Republicans are like, I'm not an anti-Semite, but they might hold those views deep down. The younger ones are just, they're like, I strongly and maybe proudly identify this way.
I mean, in Nick Fuentes' own words, I think he was like, you know, back then it wasn't cool to be anti-Semitic, implying as it is right now.
Yes, and I think that's true. Like, when I was growing up, it was like the ultimate taboo. It was like, if a politician, if an athlete, if an actor ever said something vaguely anti-Semitic, everyone was rightfully like down their throats. It was like, you do not say that. We don't do that. But the more time that passes, as the Holocaust becomes something that's in living memory to something that's more in history, and the survivors age out and die off, it's like the taboo's opening up again, and people are like relishing it in this gross way. But that doesn't mean that doesn't give Israel a blanket license to do what it wants. And to me, I'm like, I understand how emotionally these two things like can butt up and be complicated, but intellectually I'm like, it's really just two things. It's like, it can be more dangerous than ever to be Jewish for the first time in a couple decades, and it can be, the answer to that is not becoming like, creating like an ethno-state that kills a bunch of people.
Particularly women and children. Like, in exactly the way that we were, like, the ironies too of like our history. I mean, there's the headline going around that was like, Palestinians have fewer rights than some of the higher up Nazis when they were being tried in Nuremberg, where they're like, you know, Goebbels got certain privileges that some, you know, this is just to say, it's really just two things to me. I'm like, but emotionally, both of those things are so charged that they can't, it's like, you just watch these ideas like fight in people's heads, and like people are just like, I can't do it. I'm picking a side because I can't bear. It's intolerable.
Which
is where I think the same place that Holocaust denialism comes from. Because like
it's like I don't want to think it
could have happened. It's too awful.
Yeah.
Because also there's an intellectual inconsistency in it, because if you're a proud anti-Semite like Nick Fuentes, wouldn't you be pro-Holocaust?
Right. It's weird. Like it's like it's like it happened, but it wasn't a big deal. But we should do it again.
But I do think that the biggest thing to me that I think the seed of Holocaust denialism comes from, I don't think like the final, is that like it's just too horrible.
I mean, you see it in
imagine
the States with like, slavery denial stuff too. It's like, the slaves are happy. The slaves are happy. It's sort of like
they opted in.
Or like, we hear a lot about how bad it was, but like some of them were treated, it's this kind of like, I don't want to look too close. And for, in the same way that Americans, and particularly Americans in the South, might not want to look at their own families or communities or towns and be like, we, broadly speaking, did that. I think a lot of otherwise quite liberal Jewish people are like, we're not doing that. Like, it must be for a good reason. I had this experience. I went to my grandma's to visit her over the summer, and this was maybe last year, and it was when the U.S. was striking Iran's nuclear facilities. Like, this was now a year, for the first time. And granted, she's an older woman. She's both lived through a different history than me, and she's forgetful. But she's sitting there watching CNN. The volume's on like 2000, and she was like, what's going on? Like, what's happening? And I was like, well, Israel is shooting missiles at Iran, that like right now. And she was like, she like sat there for like a long time and was like, well, they must have a reason. They must have a reason. And it's that feeling of, we wouldn't do that. And it taps into, again, this sense of like exceptionalism. Like, we're the group that doesn't do that. So when we start doing that, you have to find all these ways to justify it. Yeah, there's a line in my play which I like, this question of like, do you want to? The Jews have always held the eternal moral high ground, and the female character is like, are you sure you want to lose it? And the other character who's Jewish is like, I don't think it can be lost. Yes, I remember that moment actually, because it was the chilling kind of like, it's the moment when you realize that could be taken advantage of. Right. And again, I think it's also like moral high ground. Like, for me, I think the moral high ground comes out of a place of when you've been persecuted your entire history and you have not had the opportunity to persecute others because you've been the persecuted. You go, like, we're the moral high ground. Like, look at our track record. We've always been on the receiving end of persecution. And then it's like, we get our own country, we start persecuting, and it's like it doesn't connect with that story. And as your character says, it's sort of like, I think a lot of us want to have it both ways of like, we're still the group that was always getting crapped all over, and because of that, we have license to do whatever we want. But what Beinart talks about in his book, that's kind of interesting, because I'm the like literature guy, but he's the Torah scholar, and he's like, there are times in our history in our like biblical history where we've been the oppressors. We just don't talk about it, right? And I come from a tradition of like, our Passover Seder is like, it's like Portlandia. It's like, we're reading Martin Luther King. We're grappling with questions, but in a very like earnestly kind of like lefty way. But even we don't. It's not in the Haggadah to be like, oh, like, we had slaves too at one point or another. Right. It's like, no, we were the slaves, and that's the story. And to me, I'm like, as a novelist, I'm like, let's introduce some nuance and ambiguity. Let's have a new, more interesting story. Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to take a short break, and I think after the break, we should talk about kind of the left's relationship to, particularly post October 7th, like the reaction, and I think how they lost some hearts and minds. But anyway, the second half of the episode is on Patreon. So if you want to listen, please subscribe. It's patreon.com/criticalbabetheory, and we will be right back.